I'm Doug Boynton, and you're listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition, where we highlight the week's news and stories happening in our area. There is plenty to catch up on this week as we spring into April. Issues persist at the new Chesapeake Health Clinic, where the VA is minimizing the lack of staff, but an Inspector General report says the clinic should have more providers. Hampton is proposing a public outdoor space to replace the old school for the blind and deaf. And in an interview with WHRO, Norfolk International Airport's CEO says international flights could arrive this year. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. The VA is downplaying the lack of staff at the new Chesapeake Health Clinic. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh had the story.
Veterans Affairs Secretary Doug Collins is criticizing Senator Tim Kaine and Congressman Bobby Scott, who said last week a lack of staff at the future Chesapeake VA clinic will impact patient care at the new facility. Collins says the two lawmakers are trying to score cheap political points. The new Department of Veterans Affairs clinic on Battle Creek Boulevard is scheduled to see its first patient on April 17. Originally scheduled to open last year, the clinic won't be at full staff until January 2026, Collins says. Even before the Battlefield Clinic opening was set, the VA announced a third clinic would be developed in Chesapeake to keep up with the rising demand for veterans care. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
There's also a report from the Inspector General that found the clinic was expected to have more health care providers to alleviate the burden at the hospital in Hampton. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh reported that story too.
The Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General found the North Battlefield Clinic was scheduled to open with 20 primary care teams. VA Secretary Doug Collins says it will open with 10. Dr. Julie Kroviak with the Inspector General's office says her office hasn't been part of any discussions involving cuts.
But we too are very curious to understand where those cuts are going to be. We have never written a report that suggested they were overstaffed in any way.
The Hampton VA system is struggling to keep up with a 7% increase in patients. At least a dozen probationary workers were cut from the location last month. The VA is also looking to cut at least another 82,000 staffers from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
A Williamsburg woman will be going where few have gone before. She is part of a 4-person crew from 3 space agencies headed to the International Space Station. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports what's next for the NASA-backed trip.
Commander Zena Cardman and 3 other astronauts will be aboard the space station by July at the earliest, according to NASA. The team will conduct research in preparation for missions to the moon. Cardman is from Williamsburg and studied at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She was selected as a NASA astronaut in 2017 when she was working on a PhD in geosciences at Penn State. Cardman is joined by Mike Fink on his 4th trip to the space station. Kamiya Yui of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency and Oleg Platonov of Russia's Roscosmos round out the crew. The team is part of NASA's 11th crew rotation with SpaceX as part of the space agency's commercial crew program. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Norfolk's local ecosystem is set to receive a boost in the form of a native seed library. WHRO's Catherine Hafner has more on the Elizabeth River Project's new initiative.
Louisa Black Ellis puts a handful of purple lovegrass on top of a sieve and gives it a shake.
And if you look inside, you can see those teeny tiny little black dots. Those are the seeds.
These and thousands of others are part of the new native seed library. Ellis with the Elizabeth River Project says they noticed that many plants used in local projects came from places like Florida or Delaware, even though they're supposed to be native to our land.
There's this really kind of major gap in how to grow these plants that are so important to our wetland restoration. So we're trying to fill that gap.
Like any other library, you can check out these seeds for your garden or shoreline. They just hope you'll come back someday to donate more. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
The Elizabeth River Project is finishing up its Seed Keepers series. It emphasizes the connection between native plant restoration and indigenous land stewardship. The Norfolk nonprofit invited Dakota author Diane Wilson to speak at an upcoming event. WHRO's Catherine Hafner spoke with Wilson about her new novel called The Seed Keeper.
So tell me a little bit about your background and the inspiration behind this new book.
I'm a Dakota author. I live in Minnesota. I'm enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation out in South Dakota, and I'm the former executive director for 2 organizations working in food sovereignty in Native communities. So working around cultural recovery, especially with connection to seeds and food, has been a long-time passion of mine. And in the year 2000, when I was working on my first book, which had everything to do with cultural identity and in my own family, that's when I heard about a collection of very old, rare seeds that were being grown out by this little group called Dream of Wild Health. There was a magic to the idea of those seeds because they were protected by families for generations. And some of the seeds were Cherokee Trail of Tears corn, for example, and Hopi black turtle beans. And so they were carrying these beautiful stories, and the idea that there were only a few of them left and that they had to be protected, otherwise they would become extinct, and that long history, that long relationship would be lost. That's what really inspired me to get involved in this work.
What does the term seed keeping mean to you?
One of the elders that I used to talk to quite a bit, we were trying to figure out how best to protect and grow out the seeds that we had been given. And she said that seed saving was like a bank. You would take your seeds and you would tuck them away and save them for a rainy day. But seed keeping is protecting your seeds on a day-to-day basis, meaning you protect them over the winter so that you can plant them in the spring and so that you'll have food in the summer, or so that you can restore a wetland area. But you are in an active relationship with your seeds when you are seed keeping.
Can you give an overview of what the novel is about?
The novel is actually told through the voices of 4 Dakota women over the span of several generations. So the story moves between 1862 and 2002. And each of these women has a relationship with seeds, and they protect those seeds to make sure that they have food for the coming generation, but also for future generations. But we are also following along as agriculture is changing, settlers are coming in, land allotment has occurred, and that relationship with seeds is also evolving until one day they disappear. And the question that I'm asking throughout the book is how our relationship with seeds has evolved from our traditional ways to today when we have genetically modified organisms, and what that change means not only to us as human beings, but also to the seeds themselves.
You're coming to Norfolk to speak at the Elizabeth River Project. What are the biggest messages you want to communicate to people here in Virginia?
What I'll really be emphasizing is what we have in common in terms of protecting seeds, whether they are for a wetland or traditional foods. This is the work that is really important to all of us, and that even when we take these small efforts, we save seeds, we clean up a river, this is what brings us back, I think, to our greatest nature as human beings, the relationship that we are supposed to be in with nature, which is to take care of each other. I think it's so important to share these successes and to get people believing in the fact that we can still make a difference.
Still ahead on Weekly Edition, a new deal is going to change where Southside Hampton Road's trash goes. But first, Virginia Beach's Law Enforcement Training Academy is housed in a 73-year-old elementary school. After more than 20 years of adapting the space, the city is considering building a new one. WHRO's Sienna Morales reported the story.
The auditorium in the former SeaTac Elementary is too small for graduations. Office spaces are crammed, and exercise equipment spills over from the gym into classrooms. It's not ideal, but
we will always be able to make do what we have.
That's Captain Pete Kep, who oversees the police academy. This year's city budget proposal allocates $8.7 million to the design phase for a new facility. The total cost is estimated to be $82 million. City Council will vote on the budget proposal in May. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
A welcome sight might be on its way for Williamsburg residents. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports they will not see their property tax rates change under the city's proposed 2026 budget.
Despite a tightening budget from what City Manager Andrew Trivett calls economic cooling, the city's tax rate is proposed to remain stable. Williamsburg residents currently pay 62 cents per $100 of assessed value in property tax, the lowest of any city in Virginia. If approved, residents will see their water rates bump to pay for $27 million in upgrades to the city's aging utility infrastructure. The average customer can expect to pay about $6 more per month. The proposed budget also gives more to WJCC schools. It's still less than half of the school board's request when combined with James City County's proposed funding. Williamsburg will hold open forums on April 7th and 10th and vote on the budget on May 8th. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
The city of Hampton has ideas for the former site of the Virginia State School for the Deaf and Blind. They include a multi-purpose trail, an accessible playground, a community garden, and an outdoor classroom space. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports, though, that alumni and neighbors have mixed feelings.
Then we would be going on to the main campus itself, and directly behind the pine groves is where you would find the superintendent's home. Oh, just beautiful. You can close your eyes, you can smell the pines, you can still hear, but when you open them, this is what you see: concrete and steel.
Joan Weaver walks down an overgrown roadway strewn with fallen pine needles. The way once led to the heart of the Virginia State School for the Deaf, Blind, and Multi-Disabled in Hampton. It now cuts off before a newly built 500,000-square-foot warehouse called the Phoenix Commerce Center. William Ritter founded the school as the Virginia State School for Colored Deaf and Blind Children on land donated by black farmers and landowners. The state closed the school in 2008 after 99 years and moved all operations to the once all-white Stanton campus. Weaver grew up near the school. Her father was a bus driver there and says the students became like family.
It was just a part of our life, and it's something we knew and I saw every day.
Hampton's Economic Development Authority bought much of the property in 2010. The campus was demolished. Despite fierce opposition, the city and Phoenix Industrial in 2022 sold most of the former campus to a warehouse developer, leaving just 10 acres of pines and the school's gateway behind. Dorothy West is a 1964 graduate. She's deaf and communicates through sign language. WHRO hired an interpreter to interview West.
After that school was sold, it felt like we were kind of killed, like killed in a sense, like they killed us, like we weren't worth anything.
For West and other alumni like Catherine Northen, who attended the school from 1960 to 69, the campus's fate stirs up anger and pain.
It was intended for the education of Black boys and girls, and then eventually students of all races. All of that land, beautiful land, which I feel like still could have been used in some way for that purpose. You have warehouses out there now? Go figure.
Many alumni and neighbors felt betrayed. That's where Monica Maharg comes in. Maharg is Hampton's community engagement manager. She's working to foster new faith with residents and former students. Maharg's been at the forefront of talks with alumni and neighbors about what the remaining 10 acres could be, something she calls co-curating.
The priority for our staff, for the community, is restoring and reintroducing this seeing and blind and hearing and deaf of hard of hearing interaction with each other.
The timeline for completing Hampton's plans remains to be determined. Northen says the city's efforts of late can't make up for all the hurt, but believes it's on the right track.
Those of us who attended that school, the legacy of that school is within us, and we pass that on to our own children and grandchildren and to others who know us.
For Weaver, the loss is too great to overcome. She gushes about Maharg's effort and the school being recognized with a new installation in the Hampton History Museum, but struggles to picture the city's plans fitting in next to an industrial warehouse.
I'd put a statue of Ritter up here if I had it my way, and then little children around him.
West feels more optimistic about the future of the site and hopes to see Hampton's plans when finished. She says all the stakeholders have to come together as one mind and one body.
The important part is that we agree right now so we can move on, keep going with the process and fix the 10 acres and make it look beautiful. We can go and visit and sit there and relax and say, oh, I cherish this time in my school here.
While the former campus has seen major changes, a set of pillars that read Virginia State School will stand vigil at the entrance for new visitors, neighbors, and old students alike. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
The Southeastern Public Service Authority handles trash for Southside Hampton roads. WHRO's Catherine Hafner reports they are finalizing a new deal to change where that stuff goes.
Space at the regional landfill in Suffolk is running out. Director Dennis Bagley says SIPS has been looking for a way to slash how much trash goes there.
We knew there was a lot of items that were going in the landfill that could be recycled and something else done with it. So we started pursuing this.
They'll work with a company that uses artificial intelligence to extract recyclable materials directly from the trash stream. They already have a pilot plant in Portsmouth. AMP Robotics founder Matanya Horowitz says the equipment creates a sort of garbage waterfall. Then,
the AI enables us to use a very simple mechanical device, little bursts of air, to separate out garbage.
Eventually, this could mean your recycling bin goes away. Instead, all waste would get sorted in the same place. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Hampton City Schools passed its 2026 budget last week. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports.
The more than $350 million budget is about $10.5 million less than last year. That's largely because of the end of federal COVID relief grants and state dollars to fight pandemic-related learning loss. The operating fund is budgeted at close to $300 million. It pays for 55 new positions, including special education staff, a dual language teacher, more custodians, and 19 security officers. Most Hampton schools staff will also see 4% raises and other adjustments to keep up with the market. The local share of school funding remains flat with the previous year at $95 million. The city is still finalizing its budget, which is scheduled for its first public hearing in mid-April. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Hampton City Schools is a stakeholder in Horetta, which holds the license to the WHRO station. Norfolk International Airport head Mark Perryman recently teased that international passenger flights could be coming as soon as this year. Perryman sat down with WHRO's Ryan Murphy to discuss the challenges in attracting international service and why it may finally happen.
People in Hampton Roads have been asking for international flights for some time. You've said you're working on it. Where does that effort stand?
So when people think of international, think of scheduled service. I can book a flight, I can fly out of here and go to wherever. And that is hopefully coming soon. So we're talking initially probably Caribbean destinations, Cancun, Montego Bay, Dominican Republic, something like that, I think is in our foreseeable future with our existing carriers. And that's not going to take a lot of additional work. It's really a matter of us working with the carrier to match the aircraft, the schedule, and the demand all together in the right time frame. But when people really think about international service, they're saying, well, how do I get to Europe? That's where everyone is really, when they're thinking international, what they're really talking about. That is also in the works. We are talking with what we call foreign flag carriers.
What's prevented Norfolk from securing these foreign carriers before now, and what's changed?
It's not our physical facility. We do have the runway links to go to Europe, especially with new generation aircraft. There's a certain class of single aisle aircraft that now can fly long range, 4,700 nautical miles. We're within that range now. Would we fill a 300 to 350 seat aircraft? No. Will we fill 185 to 220 seat aircraft? Probably. Our numbers show that if we were to take all of our European demand, we could afford and fill that 250 seat aircraft twice a week. So what's held us up in the past is, one, I think having that right aircraft to match with our market. And then two, I think having the understanding of the whole community in terms of what it's going to take and getting everybody on board with saying, hey, we understand this is an economic issue. We're willing to support it, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. And we're willing to put people in seats.
When you talk about community backing and putting our money where our mouth is, what do we need to be doing now to get a transatlantic carrier?
European service is going to require some level of incentives to get those carriers to come here because it's a very competitive market. We're competing with Fort Lauderdale. We're competing with Kansas City. Up until recently, we were competing with Indianapolis, who just recently landed international transatlantic service with Aer Lingus. Those cities are putting up incentives, minimum revenue guarantees, waiving landing fees and things of that nature. Indianapolis just got service, as I said, from Aer Lingus between the airport and the local community and the state of Indiana. That's the other component we need. They're putting up $19 million over the next several years in minimum revenue guarantee to launch that service. They're geared towards backing the airline during that period where the service is getting established. And if you can't establish the service in 2 to 3 years and get it operating on its own without need for economic incentives, then it's not going to happen. And they're going to pull that service. So that it's not a now and forever we're subsidizing. It's for a very short period of time to help guarantee the airline that they're not going to lose money on what they may view as a gamble coming into our market. We see it, and we have the numbers and the statistics that say we don't think it's that big of a gamble, but we have to balance that with the airline. And again, we're competing with others. This new aircraft type that I was referring to earlier, some of those destinations are outside of the range of that aircraft. So in order to serve Europe to Fort Lauderdale, for instance, they're going to have to use a big wide-body aircraft. But to use that single aisle, they can't get to Fort Lauderdale from the European market, but they can get to here. And so that's the type of matching all these pieces. It's a big jigsaw puzzle, if you really think about it. And we're trying to get all the pieces aligned.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Catherine Hafner, Nick McNamara, Steve Walsh, Sienna Morales, and Ryan Murphy. Thanks as always to Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.